Hello and welcome to another episode of the Small Agency Talk Show. I'm your host, Chip Griffin, the founder of Saga, the Small Agency Growth Alliance. And I think, pleased to have my two panelists here today. I have some trepidation because someone has been trash talking all week and suggesting that perhaps there was going to be a ganging up against me. So we'll have to see. But anyway, I've got Gini Dietrich from Spin Sucks and, of course, the co-host of the Agency Leadership Podcast, the best agency growth podcast in America, tied, of course, with Sharon Toerek's podcast. And Sharon Toerek is with the Toerek Law Group and a great agency attorney. So I have to play
I agree. A great agency attorney.
Thank you both.
It is great to have you both here. I've got to play the little jingle because, I invested
we get a jingle. Okay.
all of 30 seconds in developing it. So I play it every single week just because why not?
It's the only kind of we'll get today. So
do your jingle.
And I have to say that my opening was so compelling that we have now managed to lose viewers. We have we had more people, according to StreamYard and YouTube, sitting there staring at the coming soon screen
than we have right now.
We have now. So,
what does that say about you, Chip?
It says, I'm sure, lots of things. But
no, whenever a lawyer walks in the room, it's like, oh, with that.
But you're not.
No, but you're not one of those.
You're
lawyers,
a real
Sharon.
lawyer, but you're
but we can have a conversation.
Fun to
with
be
you.
Around.
Yes.
I think so. Yeah.
You buy in line and then you buy drinks. I mean,
You don't just speak Latin to us and make us feel stupid and.
So I try not to. Yeah, I know. It's something that is not sexy for a lot of agency people, but there are really interesting things you need to know about to protect yourselves out there, people. So I try to make it as painless as possible.
And we'll talk about some of those things that you can do to protect, particularly your intellectual property, in just a moment. But before we do, so that I don't forget, why don't you share a little bit about yourselves and where people can find you, just in case those viewers are not familiar with you already. So, Sharon, we'll start with you because you're
sure. Thanks. Excited to be here today. Sharon Toerek, founder of Toerek Law and also the Innovative Agency podcast and the Agency Protection System, which is a subscription-based service for agencies to deal with their legal matters. And we work with independent agencies in the communications, marketing, digital, creative space, all across the U.S. on IP issues and on marketing law issues and on business affairs stuff like negotiating their contracts, all those day-to-day issues that agencies deal with that have legal implications.
Excellent. And I would just, although I touted our podcast, I would say the Innovative Agency is a great podcast as well. It's good conversation, and I love hearing from other agency leaders, experts, owners, etc. So
thank you.
Subscribe to that podcast as well.
And it's not legal. We don't talk about legal stuff, so I'll just put it in there.
It's not boring.
Yeah, for everybody here a little bit. It's not about legal issues.
It doesn't just say lorem ipsum all over the place.
No, exactly.
Well, that's legal, right? Lorem ipsum? No. Okay.
Latin. It's Latin. I don't know if it's legal, but it's Latin.
Yeah. In any case, Gini, you want to tell folks where they can find you?
So I will tell you in a roundabout way where they can find me that I met Sharon at Content Marketing World several years ago. And we started talking. I'm not going to tell the story, but we started talking about.
Well, now, wait a minute. You can't say, I'm not going to tell the story.
Please do.
Sharon bought me a drink at an open bar.
Uh-huh.
So
without intending to. Can I tell you why I bought her a drink? Because I accidentally cut the line in front of her, which I didn't realize I was doing. And she's standing there looking at me like trying to decide about whether or not to go off on me, or in a nice way, of course, or whether to just let it go. And I finally figured it out first before she had to do something about it. And so I bought her a drink. And we've been friends ever since.
We have. But, we were talking about the peso model and what I've done with Spin Sucks, and how the industry has glommed onto the peso model, which is fantastic. And she said, "Do you have it copyrighted and trademarked?" And I was like, "No." And she goes, "You should do." So we did. Thanks to Sharon. And I think that's a good jumping off point for what we want to discuss today, which is, how do you create intellectual property that should be copyrighted and trademarked, that should be protected, that, I feel like the peso model in many cases has become synonymous with the Q-tip. Like everybody's out there doing their own thing, and it's not exactly the Q-tip, but it's, they're calling it.
Are we saying the peso model is on the same level as the Q-tip?
No.
Okay. All right. I'm just
Ginny was one of the first guests on my podcast when I founded it. And it's been a little over 2.5 years now, but one of the first crew and one of the things as I started to learn more about how she built her business, that one of the reasons why I love telling her story and why I loved having it, it's one of my favorite episodes still on the podcast, is because she's a great example of an agency who took a discipline that they were excellent in and used it to create another stream of revenue. So even if you don't think IP is sexy or you don't like talking about that kind of stuff, usually income streams are attractive to agency owners. And one way to get there is something that Jenny's been doing for quite a while, which is taking the IP that she's developed in serving her clients and serving other professionals who work in her industry and making money doing that as well. So I'm pretty passionate about that topic for agencies. And so we had a lot to talk about, and Jenny's a great example of an agency that's actually doing it and doing it.
Well, you've done it too. You've done it with your firm.
Which, yeah, it's my mind, I guess, is just wired to think about the opportunities. Mm-hmm. And David Baker calls it pattern spotting. When you work with enough of the same kinds of clients, and I'll equate this to an agency owner, if you work in a particular vertical, or if you're really talented in a particular skill, and you do it over and over again, you start to see patterns, right? You start to see some of and taking those patterns and turning them into a product or service that rides alongside just your direct for client work it can be gold for agencies. And so we're trying to walk the walk too. Yeah.
The thing I like about it, and this was a lesson I learned during the Great Recession, but it provides you a revenue stream when the client service work is, it's very cyclical, and there are definitely highs and lows, and it's pretty consistent because in most cases it's recurring revenue. So you allow yourself to keep that consistency when you have these peaks and valleys. And it was helpful last year too. It was great. I mean, I didn't have it during the Great Recession, and that's when I was like, I have to have other sources of income. But it helped last year tremendously because we had many clients go away because of the pandemic.
Well, and developing that intellectual property it's not just the revenue stream that you can create directly from it, but it generally helps your main revenue stream as well.
Absolutely.
Right? Because it helps you become known for something.
Yep.
You're planting the flag. You're not just another agency. You've actually been able to do that pattern spotting that you talk about, and you're able to say, okay, look, we have some expertise. We have some knowledge we want to share with you. We've got a product that will do that, but we can also do that throughout the rest of the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you were kind of reading my mind there, Chip, because what I was going to say is that it ends up, to the extent that it's not an additional revenue stream for you, which in most cases it is, it's a feeder into the fee for service side of your business. And so if you get them working together as kind of a flywheel, someone who you can't serve on one side of the house is usually a candidate for the services that you provide on the other side of the house. So
yep.
I saw a lot more agencies interested in exploring this over the last 15 months when they were either idle because their main sources of revenue were taking a pause or whatever. And I thought to myself, I've been beating my head against the wall about this for agencies for almost a decade. And it was actually refreshing to watch them see the possibilities of taking what they know and delivering it and packaging it in a different way. it's exciting. I mean, the money is exciting. It's intellectually exciting. And I think it makes you better at what you do for your clients.
I agree with you on that. Yep, for sure.
So if we agree that it's a fantastic idea, the real question then is how do you do it? And so let's start with, how do you identify what that is? Because, it is the pattern spotting that you talk about. Most agencies should be, I mean, even if you're not coming up with a new revenue stream or some sort of independent, bit of IP that you can market, you still should be spotting those patterns because it helps you become more efficient and more effective for your clients. So we'll assume that. But how do you figure out, okay, this is worth doing something with, packaging it up in some way? And I guess, I mean, Gini, I would say to you, how did you decide that the peso model was worth pursuing in that way?
Well, the peso model is probably a bad example because it was not strategic. Which I'm embarrassed to say today, but I wrote Spin Sucks the book, and I included it in there because it's the process that we used internally, and we have a very it's very strict. It's a very strict discipline that we use internally, and I talked about it in the book. And at the time, there was no graphic that went with it, and it wasn't named that. It wasn't named the peso model. It was just the process. And my publisher said to me, "We need to do two things. We need to have a graphic that shows how this works, and we need to name it." And so she's the one that sort of pushed that along. And then after the book was published and I went out speaking and did all that kind of stuff, that's when the ball started to roll for people to go, well, wait a second, how do you do this? And where do you do this? And, even today we still get questions about, well, where does social media fit in? And why is it separate? And why wouldn't it be owned? Or where does email marketing fit in? And why wouldn't that be owned? So we have lots of conversations and iterations of it. Right now, we're looking at adding in internal communications and crisis communications into it. So it's continuing to evolve. But for me, the way I started on all of this was in 2011, I knew that there was an opportunity to do online courses, but I didn't know what that looked like or how to do it. And so I sent a survey to our subscribers. And I had the advantage of having a blog that had subscribers, but many organizations, many agencies have email lists. You can do this too. And I said, if you could spend an hour with me talking for free, talking about anything that you wanted, what would it be? And we got everything from, we could drink wine and eat cupcakes, which is great. We could ride bikes together, also great. But then I got some really good insight. And we took that data and we separated it out, and we discovered that people really needed to understand how to use blogging. And this was a decade ago. So how to use blogging as the launching pad to their content marketing strategy. So in 2012, I guess it was, we launched the Modern Blogging Masterclass. And it was the very first iteration of what is now the peso model certification, but it took earned and owned media. So it took your content and it took media relations and it married the two together. And it has just evolved from there. And to Sharon's point, the more work that we do and the more often we're doing this kind of stuff, it continues to evolve. And the Modern Blogging Masterclasses no longer exists, but it has evolved into the peso model certification.
Mm-hmm. And Sharon, how do you figure out when you should actually go about protecting your IP in a more formal way? Because obviously, lots of agencies have the light bulb go off from time to time, and you've got some idea, maybe you've got a blog post that gets some traction. But how do you distinguish between sort of, that idea that's not necessarily fleeting, but not as substantial, versus something like the peso model that's worth going through the time, effort, and expense of actually protecting legally?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the order of events is not always consistent. Sometimes it makes more sense for the agency to do sort of their financial forecasting about, is this something that we really feel like we've got enough demand for, content to support? What do we have here? And this is something we're really committing to turning into an opportunity. Because if you're not willing to sort of ride it out and see what kind of an opportunity it looks like, then investing in the IP protection for it may not be a wise allocation of your resources. So I would say first, look at why you're doing it and look at what kind of model are you building. And once you've decided, yeah, we've got something here, there's kind of a three-legged stool, the way I look at it. One is brand. In Jenny's case, she has several. But it's the brand. What are you going to call this? Are you going to fold it into your agency brand? Are you going to create a special brand to identify this additional offering? So that's sort of the brand leg of the stool, which is a trademark issue, right? Then secondly, what kind of content or knowledge, the stuff that supports whatever you're creating, whether you're creating a course, I've had clients who've created proprietary content libraries because they worked in a particular vertical where they could supply the same content to multiple clients in non-competing markets. And so they created a content library and licensed that, to different clients in different
That's an interesting idea. Yeah.
of the world. And then the most traditional way that agencies tend to think about this when they think about productizing is a tech product, like a software or an app or something that achieves some goal for the types of clients that they serve. Whatever it is, that's copyright. Copyright is usually invoked in protecting the stuff, whether it's content, whether it's software, whatever it might be. And then the third leg of the stool is really, how are you going to monetize it? And what sort of contracts or terms of use do you need to put in place with the people who are going to actually buy or license this stuff to keep it all legal so that they're using it properly and not misusing it, and you're controlling your own IP. So it's really kind of a three-legged approach. And the legs aren't always the same length because sometimes you focus more on the brand than you do on the content. For most agencies who might be considering doing something like this, I'd say look to the content, look to the what of what you're trying to protect first, and then brand usually comes after.
Mm-hmm. And it's just a file and forget process, right? You get to do it once and you never have to think about it again once you've protected it.
Absolutely, that's forever. No, I mean, you cannot rest on laurels when it comes to being, vigilant about protecting your intellectual property in a situation like this. You got to keep tabs on it. You got to see what's going on. Ginny is great at this. She will immediately, her fingers slam on the keyboard as soon as she sees something that looks like a misuse. And that's that you need to be vigilant, right? Because you can dilute or even lose your rights in the intellectual property if you allow others to take it, dilute it, misuse it without your permission. And you're
Gini, would you like to talk about that at all? I know this is not something that you usually think about very much.
You know which buttons to push. It really, I mean, I joke that it could be a full-time person's job. Like I could have Sharon full-time and I could have a full-time person on my team doing just that. That's how prevalent it is. And for the most part, I would say that people are, they don't realize. I don't know if it's ignorance or it's just we're in this world where everything on the internet is seen as free and, it's a free for all grab. But I would say that most people do it innocently. There have been times where it's not been innocent. And the process that we use is if I know the person or know of the person, then I'll reach out personally and say, listen, like this has been brought to my attention or whatever it happens to be. And 99% of the time they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I saw it on the internet. I really liked it, and I took it and applied it to my own business. And I was like, yeah, you can't do that. But if it's somebody we don't know, or if it's a huge organization or something like that, I just hit forward, Sharon, and then I let them handle it. But it literally could be a full-time job. It's very prevalent just in terms of I know, there are big brands that protect their brands with full-time teams. You have to do it.
Yeah.
But so without naming names, what can you, or no, don't name names because I don't want to deal with that. So, but can you explain a little bit about the kinds of things that you're saying, right? You say that you spend a lot of time sort of monitoring, but what are the kinds of things that are problematic that if you are going to protect your intellectual property, you're likely to run into?
I would say it's probably three pieces. One is content development, and especially from an agency perspective, you'll see agencies say we use the peso model, and and they don't give any credit or say where it came from or who it belongs to. And in that case, we'll just email and say, listen, you've got to give us credit. You can use it under Creative Commons, and for the most part, they'll do that. Sometimes the intern is blamed, but for the most part, they'll do it. So in content, lots of web web stuff, internet stuff. I see a lot in speaking engagements where people like big name speakers will use it and pretend it's their own, act like they've created it. And I will have people take pictures of the slides and send them to me. And I have the advantage that we've built a really big community. So we have people who will do that, which is great. And then the third one is in new business presentations, but the same kind of thing. You're relying on people that are in those new business presentations to say, hey, we had this agency present to us and they used your peso model and didn't credit you. And I will say that if that happens, if an agency presents the peso model in a new business presentation and the prospective client knows, and many of them do, you're not getting the business because they know. So, yeah. And in those cases, it depends, the big agencies, I put Sharon on them. But, like I said, if I have a relationship or I know the person or I know of the person, I'll send a note. But
well, and you've been able to cultivate a group of people who look out for you.
Absolutely.
In part because we know it just riles you up. And so I relish the opportunity to forward those to you.
Yeah, you and Ken Jacobs. Ken Jacobs loves to do that too.
Yeah, I mean, you're situated because you're sort of your second business, if you will, and I'm simplifying the term greatly, but is the creation of this community that works in the same industry that you do. Mm-hmm. We want to see that in every situation where an agency was maybe creating a product to monetize alongside of their fee-for-service work. But you do raise an interesting issue as well that we get questions about all the time. And this does relate to your day-to-day business of serving clients with custom work, which is protecting your IP in the new business development phase of the relationship. It's an extremely sensitive issue. I have never given a presentation where I'm not asked about it.
I'm sure.
Yeah, and it is something that agencies are both worried about, yet reluctant to push the envelope too far with, because agencies have this thing about wanting to look easy to do business with. We don't want to look difficult to do business with. We want to appear laid back. We want to focus on showing them what we've got and how wise we are and how creative we are. And that's great. And you need to do all those things. But there's a cost. Either regard your IP as table stakes and don't worry about what they do with it and just accept that that's your business decision, which I'm cool with as long as you're making it intentionally.
Right.
Or if that's not your decision, then you need to take some other measures to protect yourself in those situations.
So, I mean, if you don't have a book and a community and all that, I mean, is it still feasible to create some intellectual property that you can generate revenue out of and that's worth protecting?
Yeah.
Yeah,
you don't have to be Gini Dietrich. You can be just another agency.
Well, I can give you a couple of examples without naming any names. But the one I provided to you was one of my favorites, which was creating a proprietary content library relevant to a specific industry. And this is the type of content that can be plugged into the type of email newsletters we all receive from companies. And they took this library of content. It consisted of articles, white papers, and they licensed it to multiple companies in the same industry. And their terms enabled them to do that. And they wouldn't license it to companies that were competing in the same region. But they, if you were a company that provided this servicing on the West Coast and one that provided on the East Coast, you might be including some of the same articles in your e-newsletters. So, and this agency owned all that content and licensed it alongside usually of the fee-for-service work that it did. So that was one example. Another example is taking a body of knowledge or access to expertise and creating your own virtual event or summit. Mm-hmm. And charging for admission to that and creating the content around that and owning that and selling that separately. We have, like I said, the regular tech examples of agencies that have made apps to make things easier because they see a pattern when they're, working with a client. And then finally, and this is the last one that comes to the top of my head, companies who created model campaigns. Think of it like as an agency who does a lot of work with franchises. It wasn't a franchise, but picture it. If I'm doing a model campaign for a sub shop, I can license that campaign to non-competing sub shops anywhere in the world. And I own all that IP, and I'm just reselling it to non-competing businesses with their knowledge. I mean, they know they're licensing it and not owning it. So those are just, kind of off the top of my head, ideas of opportunities that exist out there. And then Jenny's example is a great one as well.
Yeah, I think for many years, from what I've seen, the apps were sort of the holy grail. A lot of folks said, okay, we've got to find some app, some software that we can create. And lately, I've seen more of events, both pre-COVID in-person events and since COVID more on the virtual side. And agencies like the events because you can generate revenue directly off of them, but they also tend to be good lead generators for your core business if you create them right. So there are all these different ways that you can do it, and I think it really is just sitting down and thinking creatively about what your strengths are as an agency, both in your expertise as well as the kinds of things that you can implement well, right? I mean, if you're not a tech person, you probably don't want to go too far down the app path. If you don't like organizing events, if that's not your skill set, you probably don't want to create an event, at least not initially, because that requires much more investment than if you have the knowledge already in-house.
Right.
And the other thing that I've seen agencies do is create a do-it-yourself version of the kind of work that they would customize and provide people who want to license it access to those tools so that they can do some version of that work on their own. They're usually going to give up and end up hiring the agency anyway, but not always. And you're giving them value. Yeah. And this is knowledge you already have. So just repackaged.
Well, and I would say I think that's a really overlooked one because so many agencies are afraid, if I teach people how to do it, then they're not going to hire me. The truth is, they weren't going to hire you anyway. If they're going to do it themselves, they're going to do it themselves.
Yep, it's true. The other thing I would think about is one-to-many kinds of things. So, several years ago, I started doing group coaching for agency owners just to help them understand how to use the peso model, how to bring it in, be able to answer questions on the fly, how to sell it to clients, all that kind of stuff. And then I started doing it for organizations. So teaching larger organizations, their communications, marketing and communications teams, how to use it, how to implement it and everything. And that's very lucrative. It's very, and for the most part, the content's done, right? And then I just show up twice a month for a live call where they're all together and they all ask questions. I don't have to prepare for them. But I'm able to answer their questions and put them on a path to be able to have success. And we're not doing the work, right? So I don't have to have 10 people behind me doing the work. It's just, so those kinds of things, the one-to-many idea as well. I think almost every agency owner can implement that.
Right. And they're attributing the value of that community that you're creating in those coaching environments, those one-to-many to you, when really they're creating it because they're all there. Yeah. An added side benefit.
Yeah. I will say in the beginning, it's kind of awkward because they're like, who are these people and why are we here? Especially if they're not inside the same organization. And by the end, they're all best friends. They all love being together. They all have relationships outside of this community. And it's fun to watch. It's fun to watch.
Well, I mean, the other piece of advice that I'd offer is that if you're going to go down this path, make sure that you're choosing something that you as the owner are passionate about and interested in, because you're going to have to talk about it a lot. Right. And so, like, if Gini hated the peso model, I mean, she saw it's a useful thing, but I don't want to spend my whole life talking about it. That's a problem. So you need to make sure that whatever you're picking is not just good from a business perspective, but is also something that you can get behind and you can invest your time in. Because particularly if you're a small agency, it requires the owner's engagement in order to make these kinds of things successful. Yeah.
And you're right. You'll repeat yourself
over and over and over again.
Yeah. To the point that you're like, oh my gosh. But somebody out there has not heard it yet. So
I actually said the other day to our senior associate, we jumped off a call and I had probably given the same kind of advice, basically the outline of the same advice, like on the last 3, 4, or 5 client calls that we had together, because they were all, and I felt like I sounded like a broken record, but really, it was all what they needed to hear. I mean, they all, because I spotted the patterns. And I'm like, are you getting the idea that these are important things that we need to be talking about? And it's by the way, it's a great way to train your people too, because they're going to know creating these products or this IP is a great way for them to sharpen their skills and learn
Absolutely.
their culture too.
Yep. And we use it for onboarding. So any new employee has to go through our certification. They have to become certified. So they have to pass all the tests. And if they don't keep their job. I mean, that's just part of the 90-day probationary period is this is one of the things you have to do. So it's funny when agency owners say, do you have new employee onboarding materials you can share with me? And I'm like, yeah, but they're not really going to work for you because it's so different for us.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Well,
unfortunately,
we've now hit the 30-minute mark,
which
is and I realize that I feel like we should have had cocktails or something with us here because you met Sharon through cocktails. I think every time you and I have gotten together, Gini, it's been over cocktails. So I'm not sure what that says. Maybe about all of us, but particularly you, Gini. Particularly you.
Well, I would like it for the record, since we're live. I didn't even order a drink. I was in line for a Diet Coke that day.
Well, then this definitely is more of a commentary on Gini than it is the rest of us. So
I didn't even get alcohol.
Well, if you can see this corner over here, which you cannot, there are 2 cases of wine behind me. So,
She's ready for the weekend, folks.
It's been a rough 15 months.
Well, I am ready for the weekend as well, and I appreciate the fact that you all were fairly kind to me. I was more nervous going into this than I guess I should have been. So, Gini, I'm in particular owing you for your good behavior because
You're welcome. I'll get you back on Thursday. Don't worry.
I have no doubt. The beauty is that's recorded, so I can cut it out if I have to. On that note, this episode of the Small Agency Talk Show has come to an end. I hope you all have a great weekend. I want to thank Gini and Sharon for joining me and sharing some of their intellectual property about intellectual property. So, on that note, have a good weekend, a good week ahead, and we will see you here next week. And I'm sure if Gini watches, she'll be cringing just as much while she's watching as she is when she's actually on the show. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.